weekend, Africa's top leaders will gather in Johannesburg for the African Union Summit. The meeting will give South African President Jacob Zuma an opportunity to improve relations with the rest of the continent after an outbreak of xenophobic attacks and foreign nationals left 7 people dead. In April, violent mobs targeted foreigners for stealing jobs in a country where the unemployment rate now stands at 26%. We begin with CCTV correspondent Sumitra Naidu. She joins us from Johannesburg. And Sumitra, let's begin with the African Union Summit. What does President Jacob Zuma hope to accomplish this weekend?
Well, I think, Arnold, it's very important for him to create unity amongst African leaders. And also, I think the president will be looking to create more confidence in his leadership. The xenophobic attacks, he's been pressed to talk about this issue, and it will be a great opportunity for him to use this platform to actually forge stronger ties with African leaders. If you remember, the xenophobic attacks, that shocked the world, and it left many African leaders very angry because the attacks were dubbed Afrophobia because they were aimed at other people coming from across the continent. It wasn't only people coming from other parts of the world. So very alarming and very disturbing for many African leaders. And I think this would give President Jacob Zuma an opportunity to show leadership on this, to show some sort of commitment that these attacks wouldn't continue to reoccur, because they've happened sporadically over many years. From time to time, and the government was in denial for a very long time. They weren't really taking active measures to stop it, and I think African leaders are looking for some sort of direction from President Jacob Zuma. What is he going to do to stop this, to take a stand against this type of attacks?
You mentioned those latest attacks. 7 people were killed during those attacks in April in South Africa. Thousands of migrant workers fled their homes during this outbreak of xenophobic attacks. What's the situation there right now?
Well, the situation is quiet. We haven't had any new attacks. The last set of attacks happened about 3 months ago. So we're seeing, stepped up security measures in the areas that these attacks were occurring, in townships across the country. But the situation remains very tense. There's still a lot of anger on the ground. One of the biggest problems here was that foreigners, locals were feeling that foreigners were coming and taking their jobs. And unemployment is a very real problem in South Africa, now at 26%, very high. And the government is struggling to actually create more jobs. So there's this fight for survival almost. So even though the attacks have simmered, they've happened sporadically over the years. And, there is still a lot of fear amongst migrant people that, they could be reprisals. So a lot of people that have left and wanted to be repatriated to their countries are still in a repatriation camp set up by the South African government. And some of them are still waiting to go home. They don't want to be in South Africa anymore. For those that are still there and feel like it's taking too much of time, the main reason that they come to South Africa is because they need to look for work. They need to put food on the table. They need to support their families. So many of them have gone back into these townships to continue working in order to provide for their families. But a lot of them live in fear that there could be reprisals. So even though the situation is quiet, there is still a lot of tension in these areas.
In addition to those security measures that you mentioned that the South African government has taken, what other efforts are officials taking to stop these attacks against foreign workers?
Well, when the last set of attacks happened about 3 months ago, the government set up a task team, a parliamentary task team, to investigate the root causes of these attacks. So there's been some immediate interventions. The small business minister led a team into these various communities, went down to those communities, spoke to people, engaged NGOs, engaged migrant organizations to find out what exactly is going on. So they've put together a number of issues that they'd like to look at, and what in fact, the parliamentary committee gave its first debrief today and said that they would need more time, they would need more consultation with various parties, and they wouldn't only be looking into the areas that were affected. So a lot of the spaza shops that were in focus. These were the shops that were looted during these attacks. They would look at other areas as well. They would look at the transport industry. They would look at the agricultural sector. They would also look into the hospitality sector and look at a broader view of what's happening. And they also wouldn't focus their efforts in the areas that were affected. That was Durban and Johannesburg, two main cities in South Africa. They would look at other areas, to prevent further attacks and to find out what's happening on the ground.
Thanks, Sumitra. That's CCTV correspondent Sumitra Naidu talking to us from Johannesburg.